All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. Got this mic set right. There we go. We're going to start. We did years ago, um, kind of a laborious kind of thing, but people found it helpful and still recall it, that we went through Moonbeams of Mahamudra, um, Dakwatashi Namgyal's classic text on Mahamudra. One of the great modern translators, I believe, has passed away now, was a layperson, an aristocrat from Lhasa. Um, and he was at an event with the 16th Karmapa. And the Karmapa gave him that text and said, you should translate this. It's very high teachings, very, I don't know what to say about it, not an easy text. And especially for us at our humble Dharma center, but nonetheless, it was people felt a very valuable thing to do, and I think maybe an important thing to do. So we're going to do something similar, starting and reading through this book, The Tibetan Tradition of Mental Development by Geshe Nawang Darge. Nawang Darge. I read this years ago, and it's still so completely helpful because it's an overview um, of the path. And starting right in the beginning with just the introduction from the author himself, because there's some biographical material. But what I think is important is that you get a feeling for the education of these teachers. Now, a geshe in the Gelug tradition is, you might say, similar to a kempo in the Kagyu and the Nyingma. And in the Sakya, I don't know if they're called kempos. They have another title, I don't know. But in other words, a highly accomplished scholar. And the kempos, of course, can be realized too, but the title itself refers to a holder of the spiritual, the textual transmission. And interestingly, as I was reviewing this, thinking about doing it again, I found things that, of course, were new in going through the text and looking at it. And so I wanted to share some of those with you too. So let's start with the brief autobiography of Geshe Nawang Darge, who has now passed away. I was born in the year 1925 in the town of Yarkyak, located in the Trehor district of the eastern province of Tibet called Kham. So Gaur Rinpoche is from Kham. Numbers of our teachers are from Kham. Lama Tarchin was from Amdo. Um, Several of our teachers are from central Tibet, which is called Usang. Um, but they're often from, our particular teachers are often from the eastern edge of Usang, which is very close to Kham also. One bleeds into the other. Kham just means east. But this was a small village where I was born, consisting of only 50 families, and it lay not far from Dargay Monastery, a lovely place. Dark green forest bordered the village, and the hills rising up above it were completely blanketed by a colorful profusion of wildflowers in the summertime. Near our home was a Sakya monastery, and it was the custom for pregnant women to go there to circumambulate it and make prostrations. While my class who are lesser intelligence take their final examinations at their own monastery. They are primarily required to recite the text they have memorized, and they earn the degree of Ling Se Geshe. The primary methods of learning employed by the monks were memorizing fundamental texts, attending discourses on them, practicing logical debate among the students, and reciting memorized texts at night. This is just an incredible course of study, year upon year upon year, at least 13 years. And these classic texts. And throughout my studies, I memorized many of the Sarah J texts, such as the 70 stanzas, Jetsun Choki Gyaltsen's general and critical commentary to the first chapter of The Ornament for Clear Realization and his general commentary to Entering the Middle Way. I also memorized the fundamental texts, such as the Stages and Path, The Ornament for Clear Realization, Entering the Middle Way, The Treasury of Higher Knowledge, the Sutra on Moral Discipline, the first 2 chapters on the commentary in Dignaga's treatise on valid cognition, all 10 chapters of Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the Bodhicharya Avatara, Jason Kappa's Essence of Good Explanation of the Interpretive and Definitive Meanings, Pandit Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, the Bodhipatha Pratipa, and other texts. I not only memorized them, but also tried to discover their meaning by receiving extensive teachings on them. So that's something that we can do. We can look at Shantideva's text, if you have that, all 10 chapters by memory. In our modern way of learning, we've sort of discarded all of this. And, certain qualities are lost depending on, I wonder now, I notice with all the video things and the internet and all these visual things, that people are not reading even the great text of our civilization. And you can't even refer to them the same. The younger people don't even know what you're talking about. For instance, all the references to the Bible in literature, for instance, like East of Eden, John Steinbeck's novel. People don't realize, that's from the story of Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve. So there's a different quality if you're raised just on videos than if you're raised on the printed word. So too, there are different qualities if before the age of the printing press, writing was very, very rare, or at least most people didn't read. And before that, the oral tradition. So for instance, the Odyssey, was said to have been recited by, I don't know what you'd call them, but, obviously artists who had memorized the entire Odyssey, this oral tradition that was passed down. I don't know if it's true, but there was a wonderful story I heard a long time ago about monks who were in northern India. I think it was northern India, maybe even parts of southern India. But at any rate, they were had a small fire. They were camping, you might say. I mean, very simply out in some sort of a minor retreat or something that they were doing. And one night around the campfire, out of the woods, out of the jungle, really, came this like wandering yogi who was Indian. He wasn't Tibetan. And he sat down and he recited, a sutra in Sanskrit that no one had ever heard of. So this sense of this transmission of this oral culture. One of the Buddha's great monks, for instance, Shariputra. Putra means son of. Shari was his mother's tribe. And it was related to the crow. Like their tutelary animal was the crow. Son of Shari. Some scholars think it indicates a matriarchal lineage that was existent in India at that time. So it's all very interesting, but nonetheless, think of the memorization he did. By the age of 19, I was teaching disciples of my own while pursuing my own studies. Then, when I was 21, I realized the great meaning and importance of keeping pure moral discipline, and therefore took the vows of a novice monk during the prayer festival held in the first month of that year. 3 months later, on the day marking Buddha's enlightenment, I received the vows of a fully ordained monk from the Venerable Putrog Jamjang Dorje Chang Jetsun Tupten Jampa Sutram Tenzin. He was recognized in Tibet as a human manifestation, Maitreya Buddha, and was honored as the crown jewel of all spiritual masters in Tibet. Maitreya Buddha, of course, is the next Buddha who will appear in Nirmanakaya form. Feeling the thirst for more than a literal understanding of the scriptures, I soon realized the great importance of the graded path to enlightenment, Lamrim, which shows how to understand the order of all the teachings in terms of one's personal practice. I thus received an explanation of Je Tsongkhapa's great exposition on the graded path from Krabje Trijang Rinpoche, the junior tutor to His Holiness Dalai Lama. He is a further manifestation. He is further a manifestation of all the Buddhas of the three times, and his emanation of the threefold kindnesses of giving instructions, the kindness of giving explanations of tantric texts, and the kindness of passing on oral traditions. In all, I've had the opportunity to attend 4 series of the graded path discourses, his graded path discourses. This graded path is something that's, I think, really profound and of great importance. The Buddha, one of his monks once questioned him about the difficulties, he was having progressing on the path. And the Buddha took out a silk scarf and tied a knot. And then he tied another knot and another knot, 6 knots, referring to the 6 levels of consciousness. And asked the monk, how do you undo this knot? Do you just start pulling and tugging wherever you want? And the monk said, no, it only gets tighter. And he said, that's correct. You have to undo the outermost knot, then the next one, until finally all the knots are gone. All the obstacles are gone. This is the greatness of the graded path to enlightenment, because we live in such a paradoxical state that although each one of us, in truth, is actually a Buddha right now, in the sense that we have Buddha nature, whole and complete, yet we don't experience anything like that. We experience the limitations. Again, my old mind is going. There's jnana, which is this absolute knowing. And then there's vijnana, which is the Sanskrit word for consciousness. That V means by the limits. So it's knowing the limitless by the limits. That's the paradoxical state in which we live if we're doing things in the right way, in the graded way. There's this graded path that gradually unfolds that, like the lotus opening. It's extremely precious. But of course, for us, we don't have this kind of training. 19 years of it, to have a foundation that allows you to, have the confidence, because you've investigated all of this. And of course, you've experienced the writings and the transmissions and the teachings of past great people, and, critically looked at them, and much as we do in the West, looking critically at Einstein, looking critically at Newton. You get new understandings, so to speak, but they're progressing, you might say. But certainly all the great thoughts, all of that, we re-examine this. So too the Tibetans, but in this crucible of Dharma. And valid cognition, it points out something extremely important in the conventional view, the conventional understanding, the absolute and the conventional. Because dharmas with a small d are means like phenomenon, any appearances to our mind. But dharmas with a capital D are those appearances which are, you might say, an unalloyed manifestation of our true nature. So they're sacred, the capital D. Why? Because if you follow that, if you practice, for instance, patience instead of anger, you're actually practicing out of your true nature, even when there's not recognition. And also, if you continue to that by abiding in the true nature, even as it appears in a limited kind of, by the limits, vijnana, you will progress, so to speak. So the graded path is extremely important, but it does involve, faith and learning. Okay. Other teachings and initiations I have received from him are an extensive explanation of Guru Puja and Mahamudra, 4 series of discourses on Vajrayogini Tantra, including both the developing and completing stages, that's of the visualization, many initiations of the 3 meditational deities, the Yidams, Guhya Samaja, Heruka Chakrasamvara, and Yamantaka. Now, this Yamantaka is a different Yamantaka than the one that Garamche teaches and practices. Similar names, but our Yamantaka, so to speak, is a wrathful form of Manjushri. And the Yamantaka that he's talking about here, Vajrabharava, is a manifestation, the wrathful aspect of Vajrasattva. Okay. I also received initiations of Kunrig, which is one of the Yoga Tantras, a set of 100 initiations called Rinjung Gyatsa, including initiations from all classes of Tantra, initiations of Avalokiteshvara, permissions of the 16 Arhats to practice certain sadhanas and recite mantras of certain deities, permissions of the 8 medicine Buddhas, initiations of Vajrabharava Ekavira, 13 initiations of Mahakala, all initiations of Manjushri, initiations of the 13 golden doctrines of Sakya, which in ancient times were carefully guarded within the confines of Sakya monasteries, discourses on the 6 works of Naropa, the 50 verses of Guru devotion, the 7-point training of the mind, the wheel of sharp weapons, so called because it cuts off all impure thought, especially those arising from self-cherishing, the 20 verses of commitment, the 6-session Guru Yoga, the 16 initiations of the Kadam tradition, an oral transmission of Gyalchen Sogyal, and many other discourses and initiation. Is that remarkable? I mean, you get kind of exhausted just thinking of the number of times you must have just been sitting through some sort of empowerment or ritual of one sort or another, let alone the reading and the study that goes along with all of this. Again, it's just so, it gives us deep respect for these teachers. And there's some beautiful verses. I'll have to read one Sunday or maybe next time here, this wheel of sharp weapons. It's just incredibly beautiful poetry. About the peacock is able to eat poison. At any rate, the Bodhisattva path. From Lama Latsun Dorje-Chang of Saramay College, I have received an oral explanation of the 100 deities of the land of joy, the 3 principal paths, a Kala Chakra initiation, an initiation of the solitary hero Vajrabharava, and one of Vajrayogini, a long life initiation of Tara, that would be the white Tara, 13 Mahakala initiations, an initiation of Manjushri Dharmachakra, initiations of the 13 golden doctrines of Sakya, and many others. still going. From the Lama Dragi Dorje Chang, I have received explanations of the blissful way of the graduated path and the developing and completing stages of the solitary hero, Vajrabharava, an initiation of Vajrayogini, an explanation and oral transmission of the 8,000 stanza perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which is what I read from last, was it Tuesday or the Tuesday before? The Asta Sahasrika Prajnaparamita, explanations of J. Tsongkhapa's commentaries on entering the Middle Way, called Great Commentary of the Supplement to the Middle Way, and summarized meaning of the Middle Way and his golden rosary of good explanations, Nagarjuna's 6 collections of reasoning, the 5 texts of Maitreya, an initiation of Chittimani Tara, explanation of J. Tsongkhapa's praise of dependent arising, explanation of the root text, Wheel of Sharp Weapons, and its commentary, an explanation of the 100 teachings on generating the mind of enlightenment, and many other initiations and explanations. So he's listening teacher by teacher, the initiations and instructions that he had. From His Holiness, the present Dalai Lama, I have received an explanation of J. Tsongkhapa's great exposition on the graded path and his great exposition on the path of secret mantra, the great exposition on the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, Guru Puja, along with Mahamudra, and a Guya Samaja text by J. Tsongkhapa called The Yoga of Pure Stages. Also, an initiation of Guya Samaja, explanations of the fourfold commentary to Guya Samaja, the condensed graded path, the guide to the swift path, and 7 stanzas on mind training, and the 8 verses of mind training, an oral transmission and explanation of the chanting the names of Manjushri, initiations of Avalokiteshvara on many occasions, the Kala Chakra initiation on 3 occasions, explanations of the 6 collections of reasoning of the Middle Way, and the teachings given to J. Tsongkhapa by Manjushri as they are recorded in the Guide to the View having the 4 mindfulnesses, an initiation of Rig Sum Chigdrup, a long life initiation of the Jeshe Zinma, an initiation of Mahakala, an explanation of J. Tsongkhapa's The 3 Principal Paths, and the Foundation of Excellence, and many other explanations and initiations. This is from the Dalai Lama. And then finally, from the senior tutor to His Holiness, Kyabje Yongzhen Ling Rinpoche. So Gretchen and I went to India in 1980, the winter of 1980 and 81. And we were not practicing Tibetan Buddhism at that time. We had been at the Rochester Zen Center for a number of years, had been on staff there for 3 years, but wanted to have a family and, couldn't afford to do that and be on the staff there. So we thought we'd do a pilgrimage before returning to Minneapolis to eventually, have our children. And we found ourselves at Bodh Gaya, of course. And the first night we were there, it was very, very third world, kind of, primitive technologically. I mean, there was just a couple of sort of weak lights that were strung up over, away from the sutra. There was a teaching throne with the back probably facing the same direction that the Buddhas faced, but a Tibetan teacher there. And there was a crowd of people listening to the teachings. And it was this magical thing because there was a full moon up and this sort of, inadequate kind of illumination. But the Tibetans were so full of life. And at one point, I remember there was one little monk who was kind of like I don't know what the Down syndrome is. He was a little off like that. And he was running around, and other kids were snapping their towels or whatever cloth they had at him. There was all this life going on. Mothers grabbing their kids, and meanwhile, this teacher up there teaching in Tibetan, giving teachings. It was so non-sanctimonious, and yet something very profound there at, the site of the Buddha's enlightenment and this full moon over all of it, really magical. And we asked, and it turned out that the man giving the teaching was Ling Rinpoche, the tutor to the Dalai Lama. So that's what he's talking about here. Finally, from the senior tutor to His Holiness Kyabje Yungzin Ling Rinpoche, I have received explanations of the 6th session Guru Yoga, chanting the names of Manjushri, and a Vajrayogini text, Guide to Individual Liberation, the Great Exposition on the Graded Path, numerous explanations of Vajrabhairava, initiations of Guhya Samaja and Avalokiteshvara, an explanation of a complete text on the Vajrabhairava, an oral transmission of the commentary to a Guhya Samaja text, which belongs to the Upper Tantric College tradition, a long life initiation of Amitayus, and many others. These are just some of the explanations, initiations and explanations of texts that I have received while pursuing my studies and teaching to my disciples. Throughout the years of my monastic training, I spent the nights in reciting the texts I had memorized. My living conditions in terms of food, clothes, and lodging were, like those of many other monks, of a very low standard. I think it is little known among Western students that there were a great many simple monks dwelling in monasteries throughout Tibet who lived in much the same manner as did Milarepa. Such hardships were far from being rare. Between semesters of normal lessons and debate, there were a number of breaks each year. During many of these, I went into retreat to meditate on Vajrabhairava and other meditational deities for whom I had received initiations. When I was 32 years old, I was appointed to be the tutor of 2 incarnate lamas, Lagon Rinpoche and Thubten Rinpoche. 2 years later, in 1959, the Chinese suppression caused a great obstacle for the continuation of the Dharma and made it impossible to live in peace in the pursuit of inner happiness. Thus I escaped with a number of other people over a mountain pass near Sera, and we headed towards southern Tibet through the Pempo region. But because there were many Chinese soldiers in the area, we found that we had to turn back to the north. We traveled on until one day we reached the town of Baka in northern Tibet. There our party was surrounded by Chinese troops. A battle then ensued, and a great number of the men in our party were killed while trying to protect the 2 young Rinpoches and others who were unable to protect themselves. Partially to my practice of the Dharma, but primarily to the kindness of my gurus, even at such a grave moment of life and death, my only intention was to die with a pure moral discipline and motivation. Accepting the fruits of my own karma, I meditated on compassion for the Chinese. I truly felt no anger against those who were trying to kill us, and while the fighting was going on, I found a few moments to speak to the 2 Rinpoches about karma and compassion. In the confusion of the battle, the Rinpoches and I managed to escape. We traveled on, still insisting on wearing our robes, even though this made us very conspicuous, and we continued our daily spiritual practices and monthly rituals. While trying to escape the Chinese, we had gone so far to the north that it took us many months before we finally reached the border of Nepal, which of course is in the south. We had left Sera during the 3rd Tibetan month and arrived in Nepal in the 10th month and met His Holiness and his 2 tutors in Bodh Gaya. We attended an Avalokiteshvara initiation given by His Holiness, then proceeded to Kalimpong, making a brief pilgrimage on the way. In Kalimpong, in addition to following my daily meditational practices, I taught the graded path and Jesongkab's essence of good explanation of the interpretive and definitive meanings to the 2 Rinpoches. I also gave several discourses on the graded path and Tara to large groups of lay people. After living there for 4 years, I again visited Bodh Gaya. There I sought the advice of the 2 tutors and subsequently moved to Dalhousie. That's in India, Dalhousie. I think Kalimpong is in Sikkim, but I'm not sure. But at any rate, it'd be northern India. I had been in Dalhousie for 2 years when I was chosen as one of the 55 scholars to attend a 6-month abbot seminar in Mussoorie. Following this, we went to Bodh Gaya and Varanasi for a tour of the Indian universities. Then we all returned to our respective places. Back in Dalhousie, I again gave instruction to a number of incarnate lamas and monks, including Kachog Rinpoche, Jado Rinpoche, and Duldu Rinpoche. I gave them intensive teachings on the great exposition on the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, and Kyabje Trijang Rinpoche's Lam Rim notes, logical reasoning, ornament for clear realization, entering the middle way, and explanations of the three kinds of vows. A few years later, Sharpa Rinpoche and Kamlung Rinpoche came to Dalhousie and received religious instruction from me. I gave them an explanation of the 100 deities of the land of joy, a complete teaching on the ornament for clear realization, together with Gyaltsabje's commentary, ornament of the essential explanation, and brief explanations of entering the middle way, along with Jake Tsongkhapa's great commentary, the supplement and the treasury of higher knowledge, along with the commentary by the first Dalai Lama. I also gave them an explanation of teachings on moral discipline, on tenets, and on the stages and paths, and the brief explanations of the essence of good explanation of the interpretive and definitive meanings and the praise of dependent arising. I then began to teach them Dharmakirti's commentary on Dignagda's treatise on valid cognition, but before completing the first chapter, we all came to Dharamsala to attend the discourses by His Holiness on the fourfold commentary to Guya Samasha. I was planning then to return to Dalhousie and to go into retreat for Guya Samaja meditation. Following this, I hope to go on pilgrimage to Nepal. However, during our stay in Dharamsala, we had a private audience with His Holiness, at which time he asked me to teach and the Rinpoches to translate Dharma courses for Western students at the newly constructed Tibetan Library in Dharamsala. Well over a year has elapsed since we began here, since 1974. Although we cannot claim to be learned pundits, we are following the wishes of our Lama with the hope that our efforts are of benefit to those who come here to learn. We further hope that they will in turn benefit others, bringing great peace and joy into the world. So that's his brief autobiography. It's kind of, it's not an easy thing to listen to, so many titles and that. But the effect of that is, I think, to understand the great learning that's involved here. I often thought to myself when Gretchen and I became interested in Buddhism, and it was kind of like a big challenge for our families, our respective families, really some real turmoil there, because Buddhism wasn't known. This is before the Dalai Lama won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I've often thought that there's been a change since he won the Peace Prize in 1982, although nobody really knows what's going on with Nobel Peace Prizes. They get awarded every year, whether there's any peace or not. But nonetheless, it occurred to me that by the fact of getting that honor, ordinary people don't know anything about Buddhism, don't know anything about Tibet, don't really know anything about Dalai Lamas, of course, but yet they figure somebody must have checked this out. So it gives a certain kind of confidence in the Dharma, which is a very, very wonderful thing. So I read all of these today because, typically when I first read this book, I skipped over this. You sort of want to get to the action, so to speak, which is where we'll start next time, the Tibetan tradition of mental development. And it starts out, if you have the book, it's on page number 3, the 12 principal deeds of the Buddha. So we'll start there next time. Okay, any questions if there are?
Frank, it's Eileen. I came in late because there wasn't audio. So who's written this book?
This is the Tibetan tradition of mental development by Geshe Nawang Darge.
Okay.
Nawang, 5 powers, the 5 Buddha families. Darge, I don't know what that means. Yeah, Tibetan tradition of mental development, written in 1974. This was the course that he was giving Western students at the request of the Dalai Lama. And I happened to read this book, really after Gretchen and I found ourselves really without choice, somehow popped into this great lineage and found it very helpful.
I mean, it always amazes me that I mean, because I read a great deal, there is so much. I mean, the monks, especially the ones that
Right.
you're talking about just now, it's just, uh, it's, I can't even tell you how amazing it is that, they've gathered all this knowledge. But I mean, if you study, it's just like endless. And I mean, we're Westerners,
Right.
such a
Right.
different approach and to study to everything. And here we are that we have this available. And there's no really easy way through it because sometimes when I listen to Kempo and he'll say you can become a Buddha in this very life, I really have so many reservations about that because I realize the incredible amount of information, realization, contemplation, people that have devoted, like, this is what, a 19-year-old and he's teaching, but he has memorized
Yes.
tremendous amounts of information. He's had teachings, intimate teachings on all this. And of course, you can see he's sailing into realization and dedicated himself to the benefit of all beings. I just can't even begin to imagine that people such as us would be able to, I can see flipping into a transcendent experience.
Uh-huh.
But to think about becoming a Buddha or someone as accomplished,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
just, it's like, yeah, maybe in 100 lifetimes. I mean,
Except, except there's no accidents. And by
right.
having contact like this is what struck me looking at this when I was thinking about doing this book, doing this book now. Um, you probably missed it then in the beginning, but years ago we went through Moonbeams of Mahamudra
Hmm.
by Dakpo Tashi Namgyal, which is this
Yes.
great text, and it was sort of above everyone's head, of course. But even going through it was so beneficial. People still talk about it and remember it in a beneficial way because, at the very least, it gives you great faith. It's unbelievable, and so you start to have a proper perspective. Even hearing all the memorization and the titles,
Yeah.
but looking through this, what struck me this time is that one, I came across unplanned things in our life were suddenly popped up in this man's life experience. So, for instance, the very first text that he started on was the Manjushri Namagita, chanting the names of Manjushri. And I don't know if you heard that part of it, Eileen, but when I first went to Yamantaka, um, uh, Gar Rinpoche um, has this Namasamgiti text, and he gives it out to representatives of each of the languages that are there. One to the Russians, one to the Tibetans, one to the Chinese, and I was fortunate to get the one in English. And at nighttime, at 3 a.m, when everyone's doing the chanting, maintaining it, you would read it silently. Well, not completely silently, but not so anyone else could hear what you were doing. But the actual sound of that text, and it's a fantastic text, but it
Hmm.
was very moving for me. And then to come across it here, you think you just get a random book.
You
Uh,
really don't.
you don't. And then on his 3 month trip at the age of whatever he was, 16 or something, or 13, I think, yeah, 13, he went from Eastern Tibet to Central Tibet, 3 months by horse. And the only thing he mentioned, the only place where we stopped that he puts in his little mini autobiography is Drigun Till, the head monastery of the Drikung.
Isn't that something?
And we were there
Mhm.
without any spontaneously, without any planning like that. So my
Oh,
point is that we maybe don't know all of this right now, but we've had contact with it, and in previous lifetimes I think we have, because these are not accidental things, although I can't see cause and effect.
right. And that, I mean, again, that's the protection that I mean, by being connected, if you care at all, is complete. I think it is, especially because of the time that we're living in. It just is always flowing in, you
Mm-hmm.
know, to to us, to our sphere of being, our fields of
Hmm.
awareness that we're not even aware of. But it's just that intellectually, sometimes it can feel a
Yes.
little,
Yes.
wow, and
Yes.
here I am, right?
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah,
also, the Dharma is so complete because they say, for instance, the difference between um, the Geluk approach to it and the Kagyu and the Nyingma approach. So in the Geluk, it's like Tantra is very powerful, very easy for people to go off in the wrong direction. They have to have a lot of protection and samayas and understanding and everything. So we spend 20 years and we just learn everything just solid. And then we're ready to embark on the Tantra. So Lama Govinda, that great German man, uh,
yes.
uh, his guru was one of the top scholars at Sera Monastery, this very monastery, um, and then disappeared and became a hermit off in the mountains until he was discovered. And he was, completely realized. But that was the idea, is that you would learn the sutra, especially thoroughly, and then you would learn the teachings, the concepts of the Tantra, and then begin to practice. So that was a very safe way of doing it. But in the Kagyu and the Nyingma, it's like, well, life is short. And although there are risks, so to speak, um, we can't wait all that time. So we're going to jump right into it, so to speak. I'm being a little bit facetious here. But what I mean is that because there are 84,000 different classifications of human beings, what works, and they just throw it all out there.
Yeah,
And for
and
us, yeah,
that's part of your method, your personal method. You find that with practice, that's what I love about Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is right there. As soon as you learn a method, you can incorporate it. You know,
yes,
mentally, you can incorporate it in every situation that you run into. It's just a matter of mindfulness, really,
yes, yes, yes.
to
Each
keep it
each each
going.
part is complete. That's right. Each part is complete. You don't
Yes.
have to know. You don't have to have empowerments in the great stories of the 84 Mahasiddhas, these great figures in ancient India. I mean, all of them, they had like one initiation. you
Yeah.
know, they whether it was Manjushri or Tara or a wrathful deity, whatever it was, that's all. They just went all the way with it because in essence, they're all the same. They're all Buddha. Uh,
And it's just that step by step process, the prayer that we say every
yeah.
Sunday, it's just
Yes.
step by step. And you start to realize it is just step by step. And you have many realizations, when you
Yes.
practice. And right, it's there.
And how skillful that is, because once you realize it's a gradual path, it takes the pressure off you. You
It
know,
does.
people just come up with their own kind of schedules or something. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And they put all sorts of pressures on themselves, judging themselves, all sorts of, and those are all just thoughts. They're not it.
Well,
And
those are the obscurations. And
yes,
it's just, but if you know that, and it's just a mental obscuration, and you have the presence of mind to sit with it and start to experience how it does dissolve, it's just, it really takes you a long ways.
it's radical,
Yes.
and the effect of it is more understanding. The effect of it is more tolerance of other people. The
Hmm.
effect of it is genuine compassion, not some fabricated kind of thing that looks good to your friends and sounds good to you.
Exactly.
You know, your
Yeah.
heart bleeds at the earthworm that someone stepped on. It,
Yeah.
it's you can't purchase it, or rather,
But
you only
as you
purchase it
said,
through your activity.
but tonight, I mean, one of the most significant things for me that you said is it is our nature, like the four Brahma Viharas, or the four
Right.
foundations. They are us. That is who we are.
Right.
So if you can practice it with a pure heart, then you have that harmony or that synchrony that just protects you even more.
Yes.
So,
And that's the key, because
yeah,
it's a radical step to realize when I'm visualizing myself as Tara, Tara's not other than me. I
right,
mean, and
right.
we see the resistance we have to even imagining ourselves to be a Buddha. It's
Yeah,
like,
it's,
it's just remarkable the obstacles that we have. But once we see that, that is wisdom, and that is also compassion. Because when you see your own obstacles and how seemingly intractable they are, but they aren't, but you see how powerful they are, how they're controlling, habitual, then you see it in other people. And
and
that's
it's the
true
process
understanding.
of I think the process of disidentification
Yeah.
with this limited, you know, small mind that we have that's all wrapped up in ourselves,
Yeah.
and it's like you also say, it's so funny because somebody can give you a compliment and immediately the ego is
Right.
colonizing your mind.
I know.
It is so
I
amazing
know.
to see that,
It's
but
it's
moving
amazing.
into the deity, you're actually just disidentifying,
Yeah.
with that small self into the great
Yeah.
self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because it's mind, you're able to do it. I mean, there's really no obstacle there. Even if we tell ourselves, "Oh, this is just phony," And I think the sadhanas are so skillful, because you see how this has developed and evolved. Because what do? We start out with, refuge, motivation, and then we go through certain kind of praises and all sorts of stuff, and then we generate ourselves as the deity. But what? The samaya sattva,
Yes.
that isn't the real thing, so to speak. It is, but what the next thing, us as the samaya sattva, we're invoking the real sattva to come and merge with us. Za, hung, bam, ho.
Right. And
Because we fall out of it again and again and again. Yet the practice recognizes that it's all pure and complete, and yet
and
it gives us these concessions, so to speak.
it's so true. And I think again, in the invisible world, the energetic world that surrounds us, that, is why we're here at the Dharma Center and everything. There, as you move with this, there's protection. You just really have to ask for it
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
way, or, you
it,
know,
it's
oh, that's
really
what I
true.
try to do. Buddhas and bodhisattvas, wherever you may be, please
Yeah,
help.
yeah, yeah. It's really true. It's really, really true, and they're there when we actually really need it.
Yeah.
Um, and there's protection just in. It's like Lama Tarchan's wife said to me. It's just where the samayas, where the bonds of trust are maintained amongst students, but especially with students and the teacher. The wisdom mind of the Lama can flow through the Dharma Center.
Yeah,
It,
I felt it.
yeah, this wonderful thing, and that is protection. I
Yeah,
once
it's
joked once I was having lunch with George Dreyfus,
hmm
wonderful guy, professor at Williams. I think he's just retired, and he was the first Westerner to get the Geshe degree, 13 years in India, way back in like 1961 or 62. He was Swiss. He hitchhiked to India. Can you imagine? Can't do that anymore, but he hitchhiked to India and found himself without even seeking it. And next thing he knew, he met the Dalai Lama. He was very impressed. Next thing you knew, he was in this 13-year course in a
yeah,
monastery in India. And so here he is, this wonderful guy. And I was talking with him at lunch. We invited him here. He gave some instructions. And I made some offhand comment at the time, showing my ignorance, about how the Tibetans so much time in their protector practice. And I
hmm
was like, my attitude seemed to be, I wasn't even crystal conscious, but my attitude was obviously, I was considering as kind of like secondary or something. And he said, it's the protector practice is not something you just happen to do. It's central to everything. It's whole and complete. When Gaur Rinpoche first came here, he came to our little house over by the University of Rochester, and he walked in with Bunima and Abu, and picked them up at the airport, right into the house. And before anything, he sat down in our little living room, shrine room, and immediately did Achi and Mahakala. We didn't know what he was doing. They were all just doing it in Tibetan, but
Oh,
immediate protector practice
yeah.
was the start of everything. So I know we are all in a huge stream of protection of the Dharma, whether we know it or not. And that's why I feel so, able to do this, so to speak, because people who come in on a Sunday, never heard of the place, saw the sign out front, walk in, think it's just a random kind of thing, never see them again. There's been something touched there, whether they're aware of it or not.
Right. And it will come up at some point.
Yes.
I mean, maybe
Yes.
not this life, maybe the next life, but
That's right. Because your true
never
nature
wasted.
doesn't go away.
That's right. It's
That's
never wasted.
never wasted. So yeah, thank you, Eileen.
Well, thank you for the private conversation
Yeah,
tonight.
right.
I'm
Right.
so glad, I'm able to come. So, thank you, Frank, very
Yeah.
much.
So we'll slug through the Tibetan tradition of mental development, get an overview of the path.
Yeah.
And
I'm projecting for my next life.
there we go. That works too.
True. Oh, really.
All right. All right. So we dedicate the merit from this evening to all motherly sentient beings. May each and every one of them rest in their true nature. Never, never forget the suffering of sentient beings until each and every one is free. Svaha. Okay.
Okay. Good night, Frank.
Good night. Free and clear.
Yeah. Take care.